She gave water to a wounded stranger at the edge of her land, a simple act of mercy that would soon transform Lady Eleanor Blackwood's quiet existence forever. The once fertile fields surrounding Blackwood Manor now lay barren and cracked, mirroring the hollow emptiness that had settled in her chest since Lord Blackwood's passing. 3 months a widow, and Eleanor had watched helplessly as drought claimed what grief had not. Eleanor adjusted her worn linen head covering and wiped the sweat from her brow. She had been inspecting the eastern boundary stone since dawn, calculating how much longer her dwindling stores might last. The well had fallen dangerously low, each precious drop now measured with care. The servants who hadn't abandoned her after Lord Blackwood's death would need to be fed somehow, though Eleanor herself had taken to skipping meals. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dust and something metallic, blood. Eleanor squinted toward the ancient forest that marked the edge of her property. There, beneath the shadow of a gnarled oak, lay what appeared to be a bundle of rich fabric. Her breath caught, not fabric, a man. Eleanor approached cautiously, her worn leather boots crunching on the parched earth. The figure didn't move. As she drew closer, she saw he wore the remnants of what had once been fine clothing, now torn and darkened with blood. His face, half covered by raven-black hair, was unnaturally pale. A deep wound crossed his shoulder, revealing glimpses of bone. "Sir," she whispered, though she expected no response. To her surprise, his eyelids fluttered. He was alive, barely. Eleanor glanced back toward her manor, visible as a grey silhouette against the hazy sky. To help this stranger meant sharing her precious water, food she could scarcely spare, herbs she had been saving. The village of Westervale had turned cold toward her since her husband's death, their offers of assistance thinly disguising their hunger for her lands. They would not approve of her harboring an unknown man. The stranger's fingers twitched. A signet ring glinted dully on his hand. Something about its design seemed foreign, dangerous. "I should leave you," Eleanor said softly, "by all reason and sense." The man's lips parted, releasing a sound somewhere between a groan and a plea. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, her decision was made. She knelt beside him, uncorking the precious water skin at her belt. "Here," she murmured, lifting his head gently to press the skin to his parched lips. At first, he didn't drink. His eyes opened slightly, dark, feverish, wild, and fixed on hers. She waited, heart pounding against her ribs. Then slowly, his lips parted further. He drank just a sip, but it was enough. What Eleanor couldn't know was that this small mercy would bring armed warriors to her door before the next dawn broke. Eleanor struggled beneath the stranger's weight as she guided him through the manor's rear entrance. She had managed to rouse him enough to stumble alongside her, his arm draped across her shoulders, his breath coming in ragged gasps against her neck. None of her remaining servants had witnessed their arrival. A small mercy, as rumors would, have reached Westervale by nightfall, just a bit farther, she murmured, though whether to reassure him or herself, she couldn't say. The kitchen hearth still glowed with embers. Eleanor eased the man onto the bench nearest the warmth, where he slumped against the wall, eyes closed once more. In the flickering light, she could better see the extent of his injuries. The shoulder wound was worst, but cuts and bruises mapped a story of violence across his body. She worked quickly, heating what little water remained in the kettle and gathering her dwindling supplies. Clean linen torn from an old shift, dried herbs from last summer's garden, honey saved for illness. Each item represented sacrifice. The herbs might have flavored the bland pottage that sustained her household. The honey could have sweetened a medicine for old Matilda, whose cough worsened with each passing day. "This will hurt," Eleanor warned, as she began cleaning the shoulder wound. The man's eyes flew open, dark with pain. His hand caught her wrist with surprising strength. "Who?" he rasped, the single word clearly costing him effort. "I am Lady Eleanor Blackwood," she replied, maintaining her composure despite his grip. "And you are bleeding on my kitchen bench." His lips twitched, almost a smile, before pain reclaimed his features. He released her wrist. As Eleanor cut away the remains of his blood-stiffened tunic, something caught her eye. Embroidered into the fabric's inner lining was a symbol, a silver stag crowned with stars, surrounded by unfamiliar script. She had seen nothing like it in Westervale or surrounding lands. "This marking," she said softly, fingertips tracing the embroidery. "It's not from these parts." The stranger's eyes followed her movements, but he offered no explanation. Instead, he watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, not with fear, but with the unsettling sense that he saw more than most. Eleanor bound his shoulder. With steady hands, though her thoughts raced, the quality of the fabric beneath the dirt and blood, the signet ring, this royal-looking emblem, whoever he was, he carried danger with him like a second shadow. "There," she said, securing the bandage. "You'll live, though I make no promises about comfort." "Why?" he asked, his voice slightly stronger now. Eleanor paused, jar of honey still in hand. Why indeed? Why risk her precious resources? Why invite trouble under her roof? "Because you needed help," she answered simply, "and I could give it." What Eleanor didn't realize was how rare such mercy had become in the borderlands, and how valuable it would soon prove to be. Eleanor woke to pounding, not at her door, but in the air itself, a rhythmic tremor that vibrated through the stone floor beneath her pallet. She had spent the night beside the stranger in the small chamber adjacent to the kitchen, catching moments of fitful sleep between tending his fever. Dawn had barely broken, the first pale light filtering through the shuttered windows. The wounded man slept, his breathing steadier than the night before. Eleanor rose quietly and moved to the narrow window, easing open the shutter a crack. Her heart stopped. Surrounding Blackwood Manor in perfect formation stood warriors, dozens of them, armored men astride massive war horses. They carried tall spears topped with silver pennants, bearing the same emblem she had seen on the stranger's tunic, the crowned stag. Their armor gleamed with a polish that spoke of wealth beyond anything in Westervale. A sound escaped Eleanor's throat. Not quite. A gasp. The stranger stirred. "They've come," he murmured, attempting to rise. Before Eleanor could respond, Matilda's frightened voice called from the corridor. "Milady, milady, we're surrounded." "Stay inside," Eleanor commanded, gathering her composure, like a cloak around her shoulders. She quickly bound her hair and straightened her simple gown. "I will speak with them." The stranger caught her sleeve. "Wait!" But Eleanor had already stepped into the corridor, moving toward the main entrance with steps that betrayed none of her terror. At the heavy oak door she paused, took a breath, and pulled it open. Before her stood a mountain of a man, black-bearded and grim, his hand resting on a sword hilt inlaid with silver. Behind him the warriors stood at attention, their discipline more frightening than any show of aggression might have been. "Lady of this house," the man addressed her, his accent thick but his words precise. "I am Commander Thorne of Ostermoor. You harbor our prince." Eleanor's mind raced. "Prince?" The wounded stranger was royalty. "Your prince was wounded and alone," she answered, straightening to her full height, though it brought her eyes only to the commander's chest. "I offered aid as any Christian soul would." A commotion behind her. The stranger had followed, leaning heavily against the wall. "Stand down, Thorne," he ordered weakly. Commander Thorne immediately dropped to one knee, fist over heart, as did every warrior within view. "Crown Prince Alaric, we feared you lost." Eleanor turned slowly to face the man she had tended through the night. Crown Prince Alaric of Ostermoor, The blood in her veins turned to ice. Everyone in Westervale knew Ostermore, the kingdom whose armies had raided their borders for generations, whose king had sworn to see Westervale burn. She had given water, shelter, and care to her homeland's most dangerous enemy, Blackwood Manor, built to house a single noble family and a modest staff, now strained under the weight of 24 Ostermore warriors. Eleanor watched as Commander Thorne's men transformed her courtyard into a military encampment, their foreign voices and clanking armor filling spaces long accustomed to silence. In the great hall, a room Eleanor had not used since Lord Blackwood's funeral feast, Prince Alaric now sat at the head table. Though still pale from blood loss, he carried himself with the unmistakable authority of one born to command. The silver stag emblem adorned the fresh tunic his men had brought him, no longer hidden but prominently displayed. "Your hospitality will not be forgotten, Lady Blackwood," Prince Alaric said, as Eleanor approached with a pitcher of watered wine, the last of her stores. "Few in these borderlands would aid an Ostermore prince." "I did not know you were a prince," Eleanor replied, filling his cup with steady hands despite the tension coiling in her stomach. "I only saw a wounded man." Commander Thorne, standing at his prince's right hand, made a sound of disbelief. "Fortune favored our prince that he collapsed on compassionate lands." Eleanor felt the weight of his suspicion. "Fortune has rarely visited Blackwood Manor of late, Commander. We have suffered drought while your kingdom enjoys the summer rains." The great hall of Blackwood Manor, so recently filled with Ostermore warriors, now echoed with a different kind of tension. Royal Magistrate Preston sat at the high table, his thin fingers steepled before him, the king's seal prominent on the chain around his neck. His arrival at dawn, accompanied by 4 royal guards and Thomas Hayward, had drawn a clear line beneath the night's violence. Eleanor stood before him, back straight, despite the exhaustion that pulled at her limbs. The smell of smoke still clung to her hastily donned gown, a reminder of the stable now reduced to charred timbers. "Lady Blackwood," Magistrate Preston began, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of law, "the events of last night cannot be overlooked. Armed confrontation on lands held under the King's peace demands explanation, as does arson, attempted murder, and assault against a protected estate," Prince Alaric countered from where he stood at Eleanor's side, deliberately wearing the colours of Ostermore. The magistrate's eyes flicked to him with barely concealed distaste. "Prince Alaric, your presence complicates matters that might otherwise be settled by Westervale law." Thomas Hayward stepped forward, his expression a mask of grieved concern that did not reach his eyes. "My Lord Magistrate, Lady Blackwood's alliance with Ostermore merely hastens what was already inevitable." He withdrew a leather folio from his tunic. "I present legal proof of my claim to these lands." Eleanor's heart thumped painfully as Hayward laid out 3 documents before the magistrate. Each bore Lord Blackwood's seal. 3 years of poor harvests, Hayward explained. 3 years of loans to keep this estate functioning. Lord Blackwood signed over his lands as surety, knowing he could not repay. The magistrate examined each document carefully. "These appear to be in order." "They cannot be," Eleanor protested. "My husband never spoke of such an arrangement." "Husbands rarely burden their wives with financial matters," Hayward said with false sympathy. Prince Alaric leaned forward, examining the signatures. "Interesting that all 3 documents show the same date of witnessing, yet claim to represent agreements from 3 separate years." A flicker of unease crossed Hayward's face. "Administrative convenience." The magistrate frowned. "A curious practice, but not necessarily unlawful." "My Lord Magistrate," Eleanor said, forcing steadiness into her voice, "I request time to search my husband's records. If these debts are genuine, there must be corresponding entries in his ledgers." "Reasonable," the magistrate conceded. "You have until midday tomorrow to present contradicting evidence." Until then, no action will be taken by either party. His gaze hardened as it moved between Eleanor and Hayward. Any further violence will answer directly to the king's justice. As the magistrate departed, Hayward lingered, his smile triumphant. Enjoy your final night as lady of this manor, Eleanor. By tomorrow you'll be fortunate if I allow you a servant's quarters. Lord Blackwood's study had remained untouched since his death. Eleanor had avoided it, telling herself it was respect for the dead, but in truth she had always felt unwelcome in this masculine sanctuary with its leather-bound ledgers and locked drawers. Now she and Prince Alaric methodically emptied cabinets onto the oak desk, searching desperately for anything to counter Hayward's claims. Nothing, Eleanor murmured, rifling through another stack of correspondence. No mention of loans, no record of agreements. Alaric examined the desk itself, fingers tracing its ornate carvings. Men who keep secrets often keep them closest. He pressed a decorative rosette, and with a soft click, a hidden drawer slid open beneath the writing surface. Inside lay a small leather folio bound with cord. Eleanor's hands trembled as she untied it, spreading its contents across the desk. Letters, dozens of them, all bearing the same unfamiliar seal, a falcon clutching a sword. The crest of Lord Voss, Alaric said quietly. Chief advisor to King, domain of Thornwall. Thornwall? Eleanor frowned. They've been at war with Ostermore for generations, and allies with Westervale for just as long, Alaric added, lifting one of the letters. His face darkened as he read. This is unexpected. Eleanor took the parchment from him, eyes scanning the elegant script. Her breath caught. No, she whispered. It cannot be. But it was there in black ink, a detailed arrangement between Lord Blackwood, Thomas Hayward and Lord Voss, not merely to transfer ownership of Blackwood Manor, but to establish a Thornwall military outpost on the strategic borderlands between Westervale and Ostermore. My husband was selling not just our home, but our kingdom's security, Eleanor said, voice hollow with disbelief. And Hayward was merely the intermediary. Alaric lifted another document. The final payment was to be delivered upon my death on Westervale soil. His eyes met hers. My cousin is allied with Thornwall. This was not just assassination, but careful calculation. Eleanor sank into her husband's chair, the betrayal washing over her in sickening waves. He never loved this land, she said softly. He never loved anything but power and position. And Hayward continues their plan, Alaric added, even with me alive, because with me disgraced and you wounded, who would believe us? Eleanor gathered the damning letters, a cold resolve replacing her shock. We have until midday to convince a royal magistrate that 3 respected noblemen conspired against 2 kingdoms. Alaric's hand covered hers, warm and steady. Not 2. Disgraced individuals, Eleanor, a crown prince and the rightful lady of Blackwood Manor. For the first time since the magistrate's arrival, Eleanor felt something dangerously close to hope. The road to Westervale stretched before them like a gauntlet. Eleanor rode with her back straight, despite the whispers that seemed to rustle through the very leaves above them. Prince Alaric rode beside her, his royal guard following at a disciplined distance, close enough to protect, far enough to avoid provocation. The leather folio of damning letters was secured within the folds of Eleanor's cloak, pressed against her heart like armor. They will not want to believe us, she said quietly. Truth rarely concerns itself with what people want to believe, Alaric replied. The town hall loomed ahead, its timber frame crowded with villagers who had gathered to witness Lady Blackwood's final humiliation. Eleanor glimpsed familiar faces, the baker who had once praised her kindness, the blacksmith who had crafted her finest candlesticks, the midwife who had tended her through a fever last winter. All now regarded her with cold suspicion. Inside, Magistrate Preston sat at the high table, Thomas Hayward at his right hand, both men's expressions carefully composed. The crowd parted reluctantly before Eleanor and Alaric, whispers trailing in their wake like poisoned mist. "Lady Blackwood," the magistrate acknowledged, "have you found evidence to counter Master Hayward's claim?" Eleanor approached the table, conscious of every eye upon her. "I have found evidence," she said, her voice carrying through the suddenly hushed hall, not merely of false debt, but of treason against both Westervale and Ostermore. Hayward's confidence faltered for just a moment before his smile returned. Bold accusations from a woman desperate to keep lands she cannot maintain. Eleanor laid the letters before the magistrate. "My husband and Master Hayward conspired with Lord Voss of Thornwall to establish a military outpost on our border, an outpost made possible by the arranged assassination of Prince Alaric on Westervale's soil." Gasps rippled through the hall. The magistrate's thin fingers trembled slightly as he examined the letters. "These bear Lord Voss's seal," he confirmed. "Forgeries," Hayward declared, but his face had blanched to the color of tallow. "My cousin's betrayal is well documented in those pages," Prince Alaric added, stepping forward. "As is the plot to use Blackwood lands to launch attacks against both our kingdoms." Eleanor turned to face her neighbors directly. "You called me traitor for aiding a wounded man. Yet true betrayal has been working among us all along, selling not just my land, but Westervale's safety." A murmur rose from the crowd, uncertainty replacing hostility. "Master Hayward," the magistrate said formally, "you will surrender yourself to royal justice pending investigation of these serious allegations." "This is absurd." Hayward's hand moved to his belt, where a dagger gleamed. "I'll not be condemned by a border widow and an enemy prince." The blade flashed up toward Eleanor's throat. The blade never reached Eleanor's throat. Prince Alaric's hand caught Hayward's wrist with the swiftness of a man who had trained for battle since childhood. The dagger clattered to the floor as guards from both kingdoms converged. "Seize him," the magistrate ordered, rising from his seat. But Hayward was not alone. A signal passed through the crowd, a whistle high and sharp, and suddenly half a dozen men drew weapons. Not villagers, Eleanor realized, but strangers with the hard eyes of mercenaries. "Thornwall men," Alaric muttered, drawing his sword. Chaos erupted. Tables overturned, villagers screamed and pushed toward exits as steel met steel. Eleanor found herself backed against a wall, the magistrate beside her, his face grey with shock as blood spattered the town charter behind them. Through the melee, Hayward broke free, shoving past the blacksmith's wife. Eleanor saw his destination. The letters still spread on the magistrate's table. "The evidence!" she cried, lunging forward. A subtle reminder of the natural advantages Ostermore held over Westervale, advantages their armies had exploited for generations. Through the open doors, Eleanor caught sight of a cluster of villagers gathering at the edge of her property. Their faces twisted with confusion and growing hostility. Matilda approached, wringing her apron between gnarled fingers. "Milady," she whispered, "Thomas Hayward rides from the village with others. They're asking why Ostermore banners fly over Blackwood land." Prince Alaric caught the exchange. "Your neighbors disapprove of your guests." "They fear Ostermore," Eleanor said plainly. "As do I." Something shifted in the prince's expression. Not anger, but perhaps respect. He rose from his seat, steadier than before, though still favoring his wounded side. "Commander," he called, voice carrying across the hall, "bring me the royal seal." The commander produced a silver box from which Prince Alaric withdrew a medallion hanging from a chain of intricate links. He gestured for Eleanor to approach. "Lady Eleanor Blackwood of Westervale," he announced formally, "for the mercy shown to the crown of Ostermore, I place you and your lands under royal protection." He draped the heavy chain around her neck. The medallion felt cold against her skin. Brand of allegiance she had never sought. My protection, he added more quietly, for her ears alone, may prove both shield and target. Eleanor touched the medallion, understanding with perfect clarity that her act of simple humanity had just made her a traitor in the eyes of her own people. Eleanor pulled her cloak tighter as she entered Westervale's market square, where once she had been greeted with quiet respect. Now faces turned away. Conversations hushed at her approach, only to resume in urgent whispers as she passed. The medallion from Prince Alaric lay hidden beneath her garments, yet she felt its weight as though it were made of millstone rather than silver. Traitor! Someone hissed from the shadows between the chandler's shop and the blacksmith. Eleanor kept her spine straight, her gaze forward. She needed thread, salt, and information about the rumors surely racing through the village. 3 days of housing Ostermoor warriors had depleted her stores, yet the prince refused to move his encampment until his wound had properly healed. At the thread merchant's stall, the woman's daughter, a girl who had once begged to touch Eleanor's fine embroidery, now shrank behind her mother's skirts. "We've no goods for those who harbour the enemy," the merchant said, pulling her wares back from Eleanor's reaching hand. A circle had formed around her now, faces she had known since childhood, twisted with suspicion and fear. "I gave aid to a wounded." "A man," Eleanor said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent square, "as any Christian would." "Not any Christian would welcome an army of Ostermoor devils," Thomas Hayward's voice cut through the crowd as he approached. The wealthiest farmer in Westervale, Hayward had been Lord Blackwood's closest companion, and the first to offer assistance after his death. "I did not welcome them," Eleanor replied. "They followed their prince." Hayward's smile didn't reach. His eyes, curious how their prince happened to collapse on your land of all places. A murmur rippled through the gathered villagers. "Is it," Eleanor countered, "is it curious that a wounded man might fall where he falls?" "It's curious," Hayward continued as if she hadn't spoken, "that a loyal Westervale widow would shelter the son of the man who ordered our fields burned." The village priest stepped forward, his expression solemn. "Lady Blackwood, the council has concerns about your association with Ostermoor." "Concerns," Eleanor echoed. Hayward's smile widened. "Lord Blackwood left significant debts, my lady, debts to me. In light of your questionable loyalties, perhaps it's time to settle accounts." Eleanor's breath caught. "What debts? My husband left no record." "He wouldn't, would he?" Hayward produced a folded parchment from his doublet, "but he left this promissory note. Your lands against my grain during last winter's shortage, a debt that remains unpaid." Eleanor stared at the document, her husband's familiar seal mocking her. The drought, the emptied storerooms, the servants who had fled, suddenly, painfully. "Clear, you've until the next full moon," Hayward said, "to vacate Blackwood Manor, unless, of course, you've found another arrangement with your Ostermoor friends." Eleanor knelt among the withered herbs in what had once been her prized garden, digging her fingers into soil that crumbled like ash. Even here, in this small sanctuary, she could not escape the weight of Hayward's threat or the parchment she had crumpled and hidden in her chamber. "Your lands suffer as ours once did." Prince Alaric's voice came from behind her. Eleanor did not turn. "Before your kingdom diverted the river that once watered both our territories." She heard him approach, his footsteps still uneven from his healing wound. When he knelt beside her, a Prince of Ostermoor in the dirt of a Westervale garden, Eleanor could not hide her surprise. "The diversion was my grandfather's doing," he said, examining a brittle rosemary stem. "A different time, a different kingship." A breeze stirred the garden, carrying the scent of him, foreign spice and leather, nothing like the rough wool and ale smell of Westervale men. Eleanor stood abruptly. "Does it matter whose kingship ordered our thirst?" she asked. "My people see me as a traitor for helping you, while my late husband secretly bargained away my home." Prince Alaric rose, wincing slightly. "Come, show me this library your steward mentioned." Reluctantly, Eleanor led him to the small room where Lord Blackwood had kept his few precious books and records. Dust motes danced in the light from narrow windows. The prince ran his fingers along the spines of bound volumes. "I was not meant to survive," he said suddenly. "My wounds were not from battle, but from assassination by my own guards." Eleanor stilled. "Why would your men—" "Not my men, my cousins. He arranged my escort, then arranged my death." Prince Alaric turned to face her, the library's dim light hollowing his cheekbones. "I was meant to die anonymously on foreign soil, an unfortunate border incident, nothing more. And instead I found you. Instead, you found me." Something passed between them then, a current swift and dangerous as a spring flood. "And now we both face enemies from within our own houses." Eleanor looked away first. "Why? Tell me this." "Because you gave water to a dying man without asking his name or rank, because you're losing your home for that mercy." He stepped closer. "And because I owe a debt that protection medallions cannot repay." "I did not help you to gain repayment," Eleanor said. "No." His voice softened. "That is precisely why the debt exists." When his fingers gently lifted her chin, Eleanor knew she should step back, remember the border wars, the drought, Hayward's threats. Instead, she remained still, caught between the enemy she had been taught to fear and the man whose eyes held nothing but honest gratitude. Eleanor woke to the frantic neighing of horses and the acrid smell of smoke. She flung open her shutters to see flames licking at the stable roof, orange tongues against the midnight sky. Dark figures moved in the courtyard below, their faces hidden by cloths, torches in their hands. "Fire!" she screamed, grabbing her woolen cloak as she ran barefoot into the corridor. "The stables burn!" Commander Thorne's men were already mobilizing, but it was Prince Alaric who reached her first, sword in hand, eyes fierce in the flickering light. "Stay inside," he ordered. Eleanor grabbed a water bucket hanging by the kitchen door. "Those are my horses." Before he could protest, she was racing toward the burning stable, the cold grass sharp against her bare feet. An arrow whistled past her ear, thudding into the doorframe inches from her head. More followed, raining down from the darkness beyond the manor walls. "Hayward's men," she gasped as Alaric pulled her behind a stone trough. "And half the village, by the look of it," he replied grimly. "This is no debt collection. This is meant to drive us out or burn us where we stand." A shout went up from near the orchard. 3 of Thorne's guards fell beneath a rush of villagers armed with farming. Tools turned to weapons. Eleanor's heart lurched at the sight of familiar faces twisted with hate, neighbors she had known all her life, now intent on violence. "The horses," she insisted, breaking from their shelter toward the stable door. Inside, smoke blinded her. Burning. Her lungs. She fumbled with the first stall latch, feeling Alaric beside her doing the same. Together they worked through the choking darkness, freeing panicked animals, guiding them toward the open air. The roof beam cracked overhead. Alaric shoved Eleanor aside as it crashed down, catching him, a glancing blow that sent him to his knees. She hauled him up without thinking, her arm around his waist, his around her shoulders. They stumbled out into chaos. The courtyard had become a battlefield, Ostermoor guards against Westervale farmers. At their emergence, Thomas Hayward himself stepped forward from the shadows, a loaded crossbow aimed at Alaric's heart. "Step aside, Lady Blackwood," he called. "Let me end this foreign devil and your troubles with him." Eleanor straightened, placing herself squarely before the prince. "You'll have to kill me first, Thomas." A murmur ran through the attacking villagers. In that moment, as Eleanor stood unflinching between her people and the enemy prince, she knew she had crossed a line from which there could be no return. A mercenary blocked her path, blade raised, but an arrow from Commander Thorne's bow found his shoulder before he could strike. Eleanor reached the table, gathering letters with frantic hands as Hayward circled from the other side. "You simple woman," he snarled. "Did you think this ended with your husband's death? Thornwall has invested too much to be stopped by a widow and a half-dead prince. Yet here we stand," Eleanor replied, "while your conspirators fall. Indeed, Ostermore guards and village men fought side by side now, driving the mercenaries back." Hayward saw his advantage slipping. With surprising speed, he vaulted across the table, tackling Eleanor to the ground. His hands closed around her throat. "I'll finish what should have ended with the prince's death," he growled. Through darkening vision, Eleanor saw a shadow fall across them. Then Hayward's weight was gone. Alaric stood over them, sword blooded, face hard with cold fury. "It's finished." "Hayward," he said, "your men talk freely now that capture is certain. The full plot is known." The town hall had emptied of fighting. Only bodies remained, mercenaries dead or bound, villagers nursing wounds. Commander Thorne approached, dragging a finely dressed man with a ministerial chain. "Found this one trying to flee on horseback," Thorne reported. "Royal seal of Thornwall in his possession." "Lord Voss's representative," Alaric confirmed, helping Eleanor to her feet. The final piece. Hayward, restrained between two guards, laughed bitterly. "You think this ends with me? The plot runs deeper than you know through both our kingdoms like roots of a poisoned tree." "Then we shall dig out every root," Eleanor said, rubbing her bruised throat, "starting with you." A fortnight after Hayward's arrest, rain fell on Blackwood Manor. Not the violent storm Eleanor had feared might wash away what remained of her ruined stables, but a gentle, persistent shower that soaked deep into the parched earth. Eleanor stood beneath the shelter of a newly constructed well-house, watching droplets collect and slide from thatch to soil. The manor grounds had transformed. Where Ostermore warriors had once made camp, villagers now worked alongside remaining royal guards, rebuilding what fire had claimed. The conspiracy that had threatened two kingdoms had been methodically uprooted, conspirators from both realms now awaiting royal justice. "They say rain follows truth," Prince Alaric said, joining her beneath the shelter. His shoulder had healed, though he would always carry the scar, a reminder of how close death had come. "And does truth follow water?" Eleanor asked, gesturing. "To the well between them, the same well from which she had drawn water for a dying stranger who proved to be a prince." He smiled. "In our case, it seems it did." The newly appointed village reeve approached, hat clutched respectfully in his hands. "Lady Blackwood, the last of the storage sheds is complete. Will there be anything else before we return to the village?" "No. Martin, you and the others have done more than enough," Eleanor replied. The man nodded, hesitated, then added, "The council wishes to express again our deepest regrets for recent misunderstandings." When he had gone, Alaric laughed softly. "Misunderstandings, a diplomatic term for attempted murder." "They were deceived, as were we all," Eleanor said. "Deception thrives where old hatreds cloud judgment." Alaric's expression grew serious. "I return to Ostermore tomorrow. My father must be told of my cousin's betrayal, and new alliances must be forged, perhaps where none seemed possible before." Eleanor felt a hollowness open beneath her ribs. "Of course, you have a kingdom awaiting its prince." He reached into his tunic and withdrew a small object, a silver cup, small enough to rest in one's palm, engraved with both the stag of Ostermore and the falcon of Blackwood. "In my kingdom," he said quietly, "when one offers water to save a life, that life belongs forever in their debt." He placed the cup in her hands. "But when one offers water and truth together, something more is owed. Alaric, I will return before the harvest moon," he continued. "Not as a wounded stranger, nor as a prince seeking shelter, but as a man who found more than mercy at this well. Eleanor's fingers closed around the silver cup, warm from his body. And I will be here, she replied, not as a reluctant hostess, nor as a widow defending her lands, but as a woman who gave water and found truth flowing back. Above them, the rain continued its gentle rhythm, washing clean what drought and deception had tried to destroy.